Hello to all my Digital Consciousness TV fans and followers and community. I hope you are enjoying the series that is Digital Consciousness TV, where we get to interview some of the greatest minds in the world in a very candid approach via Skype. So it's almost like having a cup of coffee with them, and that is my gift to you. So today's gift and the coffee session we are having is going to be with the great mind of Jack Delosa. Now, for people who do not know who Jack Delosa is, he founded The Entourage, and he did this in order to actualize his vision to push civilization forward, enabling people to live life on purpose. Which is an amazing gift to give to the world, and he's been extremely successful in doing this. And he sees entrepreneurship as the vehicle that purely enables people to be able to live with their highest purpose and values and in alignment with that. And what he does as well is empowers people to design life that is meaningful to them. Which is exceptionally important, and being able to find and leave their fingerprint, their unique fingerprint to the world. Now, how Jack and the Entourage, and I like this, the way that they actually define entrepreneurship is it breaks away from the traditional finance-centric ideals. Rather than focusing on the pursuit of finance, he speaks to the idea that entrepreneurship is a spiritual endeavor, and it's a vehicle for contribution, which is beautiful. And when we make that mind shift, we do see the many myriads of things that can occur, and as we do go in with that mindset of coming from a place of being of service, it completely changes how we do business today. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Jack Delosa. Anyone in the entrepreneurship space or anyone thinking of being an entrepreneur, I am 12 years so far as an entrepreneur, and there are some amazing gold nuggets in here that are gifted to you, both from me and Jack, as a gift to you for you to be able to hopefully then impart that learning and go on and create that in your life. So enjoy this gift, and please, if you do like it, like, share, subscribe. We're not going to be able to get this out there and let people hear these messages without the support of the community. So thank you again for all your support so far, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Until then, keep digitally conscious. Peace. Hey Jack, thank you so much for joining us today on Digital Consciousness TV. Really appreciate it.
So good to be here, Tennille. I'm a massive fan of yours and your community, so thank you for having me.
Oh, they're looking forward to it. I've got a plethora of questions from some people that I've been able to hand pick out, so I'm going to ask them at the end of this interview.
Pressure's on.
That's it. So look, the first sort of topic I wanted to cover with you was looking at the journey to self, and I have read your book Unwritten, and for people who haven't read it yet, get it, download it, listen to it. It's awesome. But it really got me thinking about the journey to self, you know, for how our human experience to effectively awaken within oneself from, say, our dream state to this reality. We can pardon ourselves for beginning the question, are we waking up into the dream or are we sleeping in reality? And as we begin the journey of self, we reach almost like a knowing that we don't really know much at all. It's all predicated on the supposition that this awakening process will somehow take us on a path of becoming an enlightened being. Yet as we awaken to the soul's purpose, we realise that the power lies in knowing who we are and why we're here. So Jack, who are you for our audience, and why are you here?
Such a good question. You know, I subscribe to the principle that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So I view life and business and everything within the context of life as, you know, perhaps quite a small part of a larger spiritual game. So who am I? I'm still, you know, I don't know if we ever fully can understand or comprehend who we are in our entirety and in our wholeness. Yeah. And so I guess I'm somebody who is on a quest to better understand myself and to do whatever I can to help other people go on a similar journey. I you know, particularly today, and I've gone through such a, you know, for anyone that's read my first book, Unprofessional, and now for those of you that will read Unwritten, you'll see firsthand an evolution in who I am, right? And so I today I'm probably less focused on. I was going to say less focused on self, and I don't mean that to a detrimental sense, but I mean I think my sort of awareness is perhaps expanded beyond myself, which is a good evolution to go through. And it's also become less about a destination and more about the journey. I'm just happier than I've ever been, and I'm more fulfilled than I've ever been. And no one's life is ever perfect, and particularly for those that follow an entrepreneurial path, our life is probably challenged most of the time. Yeah. But that's the challenge that we opt in for, and I think it's a challenge that we can grow from. But I'm not so much concerned with outcome or destination, more so in losing myself in the journey, viewing work and business as a form of artistry. And in doing so, I'm able to create far more effectively. And, I suppose you ultimately arrive at an even better destination.
Yeah, fantastic. And on that journey for you, I mean, for us to transition into that, and I've had a similar transition in the evolution of going from, I suppose, finance-centric ideals to embodying, contribution and being of service.
Thank you. That's right.
So, what was that transition like for you? Where did that occur? And obviously, between the two books, Unprofessional and Unwritten, somewhere in between there, you had some massive transformation. What was that experience?
Well, it's a really natural one, right? Because it speaks to who I've always been. When, the only reason I ever went into business was because I wanted to be able to influence things, right? When I was 5 and, my friends were getting their pen licenses and stuff and learning whatever it is you learn at primary school or wherever you are at the age of 5.
I remember that, pen license.
Do you? Yeah. We've actually, there's a bit of a detour. We've got a 12-year-old girl in one of our programs here. And I said, Jules, what do you learn when you're 5? I keep talking about to people what I was learning. What do you actually learn when you're 5? And she said, you're kind of coming up to your pen license. So I thought, okay, I'll use that from now on.
I like it.
Yeah. And it still exists. You still need a license. So my parents started they didn't start. They were running a not-for-profit organisation called Breaking the Cycle, and they'd take long-term unemployed youth off the street, and they put them through a 3-month program, within workshops and classrooms and out in the wilderness, life skills, and they place them into employment. And they could only take a finite number of kids each year. So they would deliberately, purposely choose the worst of the worst, people that were on and off drugs, in and out of abusive homes, in and out of jail. Yeah. And they put them through these 2-month programs, right? And so this is what I was looking at experiencing when I was 5. I'd see people coming in literally half dead, going through a program where they would transform and become more of themselves and decide on purpose and develop direction and do all of this sort of stuff. And so at the age of 5, I was given a very first-hand exposure into, firstly, the traditional system doesn't work for everybody, but secondly, anybody, regardless of how far down a certain path they've gone, with the right TLC and the right support, can build a life that's meaningful to them. If they're put in the right environment and surrounded with the right support. So, and so that was quite formative for me. Then the government restructured the way they issued capital out to not-for-profits. Breaking the Cycle was unsuccessful in raising capital under the new structure, so the organisation collapsed. So the thousands of kids that would not go back to jail, or the thousands of kids that wouldn't die as a result of, a couple of them lived with me at the time. They sort of became like my brother and sister. They would now die. They would now go back to jail because, so Breaking the Cycle, I'm not sure if I mentioned, we're the most successful job placement agency for long-term unemployed youth in the country, bar nobody. So they're very successful at what they did, but then they collapsed because they didn't have the finance. So, and I had a number of these experiences throughout childhood, throughout my teenage years, and so my whole search began when I was probably about 14. And I thought I wanted to become a politician because I thought they were the people that influence things. And then you kind of learn that they don't influence much at all. And I sort of started to develop an affinity towards entrepreneurs and innovators and inventors because they were people who introduced new ideas or new concepts or new products or technologies to the world that ultimately made an impact, right, and a change. And so that's my natural state of being, if you like. So I think to answer your question, from the evolution from a more financial-centric place and space to a more contribution-centric place and space was just an unlearning of all the corporate business bullshit we learn when we step into the business world. And in my case, I did that at the age of 18, and so you kind of, okay, this is what it's about. And then you arrive at a point, for me, it's probably 5 or 6 years later, where you go, I think I can do this in a way that's more authentically me. And then I think the more we follow that path, the more authentically ourselves we become, the more powerful our business becomes as a result.
Yeah, I love it. And that takes us nicely on to the next section, which is about money and meaning, because I know that you talked about this in your book. And for me, the journey of money and meaning, it can really be it's a world that can pretty much be defined by a small piece of green, pink, whatever colored paper. It's given the power to divide us into an illusion of separateness, when the actual illusion is the green piece of paper itself. And we give it the power to send us on a journey of absolute focus to the point of actually forgetting who we authentically are. We give it meaning and emotion. We give it a personality. We give this, we actually I've seen people give it a piece of real estate in their hearts where the people they love belong. And whilst it's part of the system of our current paradigm of survival, if you like, it's not the system. I believe the trick is actually learning to work with it instead of for it. So we don't end up spending all that time focused on this and we chase it all the way to the grave, and we actually end up seeing that there's no one there left to sort of see us at the send-off. So in your own personal journey from money to meaning, what was the pivotal moment that, perhaps we've covered a bit of this now, that shifted your awareness in bringing a balanced perspective to the perception and relationship to money? And what fundamental physical, esoterical, mental modalities have you applied to have money work for you instead of work for it?
Yeah. And I think for me, the key word I heard you just say was balance, right? And that's so incredibly important, because I am a person, and by the way, the research backs all this up. So the most commercial venture capitalists in the world will be watching this right now, oh, Jack's very spiritual, he's not commercial anymore. Bullshit, right? Everything I'm saying is backed up by research and fact in terms of great businesses, great entrepreneurs, great companies. And that is that the companies that go into business in search of a larger purpose, i.e. not for the pursuit of finance, ultimately become larger than the businesses that go into business just to make money, right? If you look at a Jobs, or you look at a Branson, or you look at a, in a more political sense, a philanthropic sense, like a Nelson Mandela, right? Mandela needed a lot of money to fund everything that he did throughout his lifetime. They never started a business or started a project or started a direction because in the pursuit of finance. Like the pursuit of finance is empty at best and hollow at worst. They viewed their work, whether it be their business, whether it be in Branson's case, their businesses, in Mandela's case, his political pursuit, they viewed their work as an extension of who they are, right? And Jobs said this in one of his last interviews. He was on stage with Bill Gates at one point at a conference, and he said, it's really good to see some of the up-and-coming generation now starting to build businesses and stick with them to a point where they can become great, rather than building them and trying to sell them 5 years later, right?
Yeah, right.
And so, there are a lot of sort of VCs or private equity firms, build and sell within 5 to 10 years. And I think a portion of the world is still sort of hung over from that period of doing business. However, I think it's becoming more widely understood that to go into business from a place of making the world a better place is far more powerful. And, it just so happens it also builds more successful companies. Right? And however, when people hear me say that, they go, money's not important.
Yeah,
and I go,
right.
no, I didn't say that. That's not what
Still
I said.
important.
Thank you. I said it shouldn't be the driver. However, it absolutely is the fuel, right? You go back to breaking the cycle. When breaking the cycle, came undone. Dad said to me, I still remember, I must have been, 9 years of age or something. He said to me, you can't run off love, trust and pixie dust. There needs to be a fuel. There needs to be a commercial nous. I've come to view business as a vehicle to take ideas into the world. However, even if I'm in the business of making a difference, money is the fuel that will enable my vision to travel. Right? Doesn't matter whether you're Jack Delosa or Nelson Mandela. Branson said this to Mandela. He said, people think Mandela's a political activist, and he obviously was. He said, what a lot of people don't realise, he was one of the most best salespeople you've ever met. He said, I couldn't have dinner with Nelson without writing a check for $1 million.
Yeah, right.
Right? That's okay when you're Richard Branson, I suppose. But I think there does need to be a recognition that with money, influence can amplify. Yeah. And that can be a powerful thing. So, and by the way, I also think my message isn't start a business. My message isn't do anything. My message is find out and kind of discover and determine and decide who you are and live a life that aligns to that, right? So if the vision for your life is, one of my best mates, his mum makes spaghetti bolognese for all of her boys every Monday night. So wherever they are across Australia, this is Andrew Morello, right? Wherever they are, wherever him and his brother and his sister, I should say, across Australia at any given point, they usually fly back to Moonee Ponds in Victoria, in Melbourne, and they have the spaghetti bolognese, right? Last thing she should do is go and start a business. She should not be starting. Like, that's what brings her fulfillment. So do that, right? Remove all judgment. Just do whatever works for you. My dad now lives in Daylesford, which is a small country town outside of Melbourne. He lives there with his wife, with a veggie patch, speaks to his boys, probably once a week, and that's fulfillment for him. And so I'm not saying money is a necessary fuel for everybody, but I do believe that if you are going along an entrepreneurial path or a philanthropic path, yes, you should be driven by purpose. However, don't forget, money is a very powerful fuel.
Very true, very true.
There's a long answer.
I like it. No, it's good. I love it. And do you think that the evolution of that, requirement, I suppose, for fuel, it changes as our relationship changes to it as well? Because we evolve, obviously, in our journey of what our why is, and then we go, oh, well, this is going to bring me fulfillment now. And it's almost like something I've learned is not conditioning myself to get caught in just that conditioning of that's going to be my why for the rest of my life. It's kind of like it's almost allowing it to be a bit broader to allow the space for what I don't know could come. And so, almost like giving myself the space to, as I evolve, knowing that my why may also evolve at the same level.
So interesting you say that, because and this can be scary. And let me explain what I mean. I think lack breeds obsession, right? And so if we tend to lack something, money, love, attention, beauty, whatever, intelligence, whatever, we can become obsessed by its acquisition. Yeah. And what happens when we start a business is we don't make any money, probably for a very long time, right? So my first 5 years in business, I made no money, lost a lot of money that I didn't have. And I think some of the financial centric motives can be born out of that period. Even if you didn't go into business for money, you then become broke for 5 years and you then start to think the game's about money, right? The scary part is you then go, okay, this quest for me is about money. I want the Porsche or I want the whatever. Scary thing for most, well, I don't know if it's most, but for some, is you then make the money and you then go, fuck.
Didn't want this.
That did nothing for me.
I'm still empty.
Yes, yeah, I'm still completely empty, right? And that's a moment where you go, hold on, did everything I just think I would, like the early mornings, the motivational quotes on Instagram, the go, I've been doing for the last forever. I've just got a check for a couple of whatever, for a bit of money, and got the Porsche. And I'm not talking from my experience. I don't own a Porsche. However, I am talking from my experience in that I did make a lot of money and have made a lot of money, and I will continue to make a lot of money. However, for some, and probably for most, it doesn't bring fulfillment. It does make things easier. I'm now in a position today where I can focus only on my mission in life, right? And so I'm at a point today where I only do what only I can do. Yeah. And to Neil, if I told you the stuff that I don't do, particularly around the house, you would judge me, right? But it's only for the purpose of I want to be doing this, or when I get off the phone to you, I want to be sitting across from my COO, or I want to jump into a meeting with my execs. Or after I finish on the call with you today, I go away and we do our Made It Happen circle here. With my team of 80 staff, we stand in a circle and tell each other, we call out who did awesome things this week that embodied the values and the vision of the Entourage. Yeah. And so that's what I want to, and then if I go home and I get home at 8 o'clock, I want to be reading a book, like about the conversation you and I had before we hit record, around human biology and transcendence and spirituality and how to lead better. I don't want to be washing clothes, right? Now, in the first 5 years, I didn't have a choice. You got to do it. But that's what money has allowed me to do. And so glad I became successful, and I will continue to do that, and I will continue along that path. However, it cannot be viewed as a source for fulfillment because you end up very disappointed.
Yeah, very true. Beautiful point. Now, I want to talk to you about conscious co-creation because, again, this is something that came up in your book. So often in the stories we create in our lives, we subconsciously feed off the drama and seeking, like we were just talking about, the outward validation to justify why we might be feeling a certain way. So if we complain about something, then I sort of see that as we're doing that at a certain frequency, it then gets validated at that vibration, which conditions and trains that set vibration into a cellular level, creating neurological pathways that pretty much feed our reticular activating system within the brain. And then all this goes into this massive alchemical pool of belief that's conditioned from an original illusion. So once it does this, it translates into an anchor and keeps people stuck there for days, for weeks, for years, even a lifetime. And most people aren't even aware that they're consciously co-creating their own reality. So it got me thinking, at what point does it change from subconscious creation to conscious co-creation? And my question to you is, how did you personally make the shift in awareness to ensure that your outer world directly reflects your inner world? And how do you really know that you've successfully achieved that alignment if, and I'm going to throw a curveball, if your inner world is a conditioned pre-program? So do you defrag it first, unlearn everything you've learned, rebuild, and in order to reach that alignment first? What's the process that you've gone through in the conscious co-creation path?
So I think it starts with, by the way, beautiful question.
Thank you.
It starts with understanding everything you just said.
Yeah.
What most people don't, and so just the awareness itself gives birth to moving to a more independent state.
Yeah.
Meaning, most people don't realize that the work, and you realize it as soon as someone says it, but most people need a conversation. Probably everybody that's been brought up the way we're all brought up needs somebody to have this conversation, and then you become aware of it, right? Yeah. And so psychology calls this social constructionism, right? Which is to say that the world around us is imaginary and it is made up. You said it before. Money isn't real. The value of money is only our belief in the value of money. Our belief in money goes away, then we've got a few pieces of plastic lying around or a few data points in our Commonwealth Bank, internet banking, right? And who cares? Because I can no longer trade it for anything. Politics is a man-made mental construct, right? Governments are a man-made mental construct. Education and how we do education is a man-made mental construct, right? Nobody ever came down from, I'm not a religious person, but nobody ever came down from the heavens above and said, kids need to start an education process when they're 5. They need to go into classes and year levels grouped according to age. They need to do this curriculum, 6 years in primary school, 6 years in high school. We should then have something optional. We just made all that up, right? Worse, people 100 years ago made all that up, right? And so when you realize that everything, and like even the stuff that surrounds it, apart from nature perhaps and ourselves, was all made up by somebody who had an idea and was pursuing progress and wanted to build a product or to achieve an outcome, and then they took it to the world. But the world around us is made up of a mental construct. And in psychology, around this social constructionism thing, I call them OPRs, right? Other people's rules. And it's stuff like, your success in life will be relative to your formal qualifications, right? Which isn't good news for me because I have none. Or it takes money to make money. Yeah. Or good things come to those who wait. Or even like if I was to challenge, perhaps an unpopular challenge might be to say, marriage is often an OPR. And I'm not saying marriage is a bad thing. However, what I am saying is if somebody chose not to get married, that would be a very valid choice in my book, right? Because, again, it's just a social construct. You do not need to go to school, university, get a job, get married, have 2.3 children, get the white picket fence, retire. Average Australian retires with $71,000 in the superannuation and then die. You don't that's not written anywhere, right? And so the first part of breaking through that kind of hypnosis that you're referring to is just going, oh, fuck, that's actually true. This is all just models that I've developed in my mind. And the thing with OPRs is they often do not reflect our reality, but create our reality. Meaning our mental constructs of the world often don't reflect what is real. They just create our reality, and they form a boundary around our reality, and therefore confine our thinking to whatever boundaries we have set up for ourselves. And so I think it's purely about firstly realizing that, and then it's about radical surrender to heart. So one of the sort of tail end of your question was, how do you know when you've achieved it, kind of thing? Like when you've achieved a relative independence free of societal or cultural expectations and paradigms. And I think the answer is joy, fulfillment, curiosity, progress, right? I think those are your barometers. Joy is a really good internal compass. Follow what brings you joy. Follow what makes you curious. And I think when you can sit somewhere and go, you know what, I've got everything I could ever want, but I could lose it all tomorrow, and I think I'd still be sitting here smiling and laughing with Daniil, just as happy as I am right now. I think you're doing all right.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you can find the extraordinary in the ordinary, and none of the rest of the stuff matters.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. Some of the most profound moments I have, this is a little bit woo-woo now, but some of the most profound moments I have is, you know, like I'll be walking down the street, and this is going to sound very woo-woo, and it is, but like, and like the sun will just hit my eyes, and I'll stop and I'll look at this, and there's more, you know, magic for me in that moment than what a lot of society would deem to be material success.
I hear you. I have the same thing.
And Jim Carrey said, you know, Jim Carrey is actually, you know, we sort of think of him as a comedian, but he does have a lot of really wise things to say. Really interesting. He said, I reckon everyone should make a lot of money and become famous so that they could work out that's not the answer.
That's not the answer, you know? I saw that actually the other day. It was a profound statement, and it's so true that, you know, it is being able to go outside and look at the brilliance of Mother Nature, and just to go, holy crap, how does that flower know to flower with that colour and that brilliance and at that exact point in time? Like, just when you delve deeper into that and you look at that and you just think, it's phenomenal. And I think it's funny that we all point out there saying, where are the aliens? And I'm like, guys, I think we're here. I think we've landed. Because when you look at the construct of the human biology and the way that we are, and there's, you know, it just the way it all comes together as you start looking at that with a different lens. The social constructionism as such doesn't really play a role in any of that. So, interesting. So I want to talk to you about success as well, because obviously that's a paradigm that is based on people's belief systems, and you know, I often like to relate the desire of success to breathing. You know, sometimes we are required to be drowned in order to realize how important this metaphorical breath really is. And we take advantage of the breath. It gives us life. And it begs the question, well, are we breathing in life, or is life breathing us? Now, we don't wake up in the morning and go, my purpose today, I've got to breathe. We just sort of expect it to be there. We become complacent. And it's only until we have the breath taken away that we realize how much we want or perceivably need it. So this goes for me in the same perception of success, that often we reach a point of complacency and we just expect it to turn up, and we're like, oh, the universe will provide. But if we don't put action into it, it can take something or someone to strip it from us for us to truly get it. And even in my own journey of building a multi-million-dollar business, I wanted it so bad, and it was a financially centric ideal, and yet I was spiritually void. And when I got to the top of that ladder, as Joseph Campbell says, you know, I realized the entire time that ladder was against the wrong wall. So when we desire or yearn for this perceived success, we need to check in with our hearts and our minds as well to ensure that that ladder's against the right wall. So in your journey of what society coins successful, how did you check in to make sure that that ladder wasn't against the wrong wall? Did you have approaches? Was it just like a mental check-in, or was it did you sort of take moments through meditation or anything like that, where you realized that you were just within alignment with that wall being that ladder being against the right wall?
Yeah, well, I think I think I went into business with my ladder against the right wall, and then somewhere along the journey, as I kind of highlighted before, I think I moved my ladder to the wrong wall and thought it was about a different game, and then moved it back later and go, oh, now I'm home again, kind of thing. I think in a practical sense, I remember speaking to a girlfriend of mine years and years and years ago. Her name was Liz. She's amazing. And we were talking about how every 3 months or so we feel that unless we check back in with ourselves, then we can tend to veer off track. And I found this to be relatively consistent with most humans, right? Is that we need to check back in quite thoroughly at least once a quarter.
Yeah.
And she called it the ice age. She was like, every 3 months or so, I reckon your mind freezes over and your heart freezes, and you just kind of start going through the motions, right? And if this is your path, then you kind of might start to do a little bit of that. And the further you go unchecked, or the further you go to check back in with self, the more you can kind of veer. So what I started to do, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, was, I started to go to the Blue Mountains by myself every 3 months for 2 nights, 3 days, with very little electricity. I'd leave the laptop at home. I'd take the phone, but the phone would be off. I'd turn it on once a day to check for any emergencies. No emergencies, turn it back off again. A fireplace, a chair, a bed, a kitchen kind of, and a 3-hour walking track down around the sort of valleys of Blackheath, which is in Blue Mountains, right? And I deliberately stay in a very small sort of hut. So incredibly inexpensive thing to do, right? And if I was in Melbourne, I'd do it in Daylesford, and if whatever. So I think anyone can do something like that. And I just wouldn't plan anything. And I'd look out over the mountains, or I'd light a fire, and I'd journal, and I'd meditate, and I'd sleep, and I'd reflect, and I'd imagine the future. And I wouldn't go through any strategic planning. I'm not going that detail. Yeah. I'm more just reconnecting with what I would term my higher self, right? And just creating the space to listen. And it was fascinating to me. I could be carrying a challenge for months. I still find this just completely fascinating. Carrying a challenge for months. And I would get to the Blue Mountains. I wouldn't have my laptop. I'd turn off my phone. I'd light a fire. And with half an hour, have several solutions to a challenge that I hadn't developed one solution for 2 months.
Wow.
Right. Now, the answers were all, and there was never, the solution is never rocket science. It's often the greatest solutions are born out of simplicity, I think. And it's often really simple. But it's why did I have that 2 months ago? It would have been a lot easier if that had happened. And all it was is I'd created the space to listen. So that's really what I suppose I'm doing in those Blue Mountain trips, is just listening. Yeah. So I think that we all have happiness strategies, right? Things that we do that allow us to tune back in and realign with where we're going and reflect on where we've been and all of that sort of stuff. And it can be, for me, it's going to the gym, it's being by the ocean, it's going for a swim, time with my dog, reading a good book, meditating a little bit, although I'm just getting into that, writing to a degree. It's a lot of this stuff is free. You don't need anybody else. It might be time with loved ones, it might be time away from loved ones, whatever. And I think that enables you to tune back in. Yeah. Once I tune back in, I'm simply following, again, what I call my inner GPS system, which is my joy, fulfillment, and curiosity, right? And so all I'm doing is removing all of the noise and all of the bullshit from the outer world and all of these mental constructs we build around ourselves. I'm removing all of that so I can retune back into intuition, which, and then, I think in terms of where should your intuition guide you toward your joy and curiosity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I call it a soul sabbatical.
Yeah.
Soul sabbatical, and you take and sort of try and take at least 1 hour a week where I don't take any technology or anything, and just sit in the park, and then also just look at the trees and nature and ask also asked nature, because nature can talk to us, the way in which we perceive it. Let's watch ourselves as we look at a tree, for instance, and then do we go straight to the faults in the tree? Oh, look at the dried branches, look at that. Do we look at those elements, or do we look at the beauty in the tree? And it almost becomes its own conversation piece when you have the ability to be able to just have that moment of quiet away from the digital noise and, well, the human noise as well. So it's pretty powerful.
It's so powerful.
And it is amazing. I find I'm more productive when I have that 1 hour gap. I had the most productive day, and I'm like, how do I fit that all in? I don't get it. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. I still refer to my two days, or recently I did it like a week in Fiji, and I do very little, but it's the most productive days or weeks in my calendar.
So counterintuitive, but so fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
So on the topic of leaders, I wanted to talk about the glorification of leaders. When we go on this journey of self, I believe that we need to be mindful of not falling into the trap of the guru effect, where we are a student to life and we know that we don't need to be like that person we admire or copy what they do. We simply need to learn what resonates for us and create our own path following the steps that have pretty much already been laid before us, so we can have our own unique brilliance, which of course is what you talk about a lot. And now media and cultural conditioning, though, often glorifies leaders of today, setting them up on this massive pedestal and giving the majority a false perception that it's unattainable to get that level of perceived success. So ultimately that sets that leader up for failure as well, or to disappoint, and trains society to consistently look outward for that answer, that validation, and so on. So if we just allow ourselves that space, like a soul sabbatical, to tune into it. How do you feel as a society we need to address the topic of the glorification of leaders, and what do you think can be done to humanise this more and bring into balance how we perceive success and how we perceive gurus, and almost like the balance of that student-teacher modality that we have within us?
Yeah, such a good question. So I think that you're absolutely right. History can put people that have achieved great things on a pedestal to such a degree where they appear to be larger than life, and their achievements unachievable and their contributions unattainable, right? And what's been fascinating for me, because I always have studied leaders like that, right? But what I find whenever I do is their humanity. Yeah. When history remembers Nelson Mandela, we talk about the most revered political activist or the most revered revolutionary or freedom fighter ever to walk the earth. And it almost gives this perception of this path elegantly walked, always understood, completely capable, this visionary going, this is where we're going, this is what we're going to do, and garners all of the resource and all of the support and strives gallantly towards this outcome and achieves it gracefully. It's just not the reality, right? And when you study these people, I'll get that in a second, but when you study these people, you find that their path is just as messy as ours. You find that their insecurities are just as loud as ours. You find that their shortcomings are just as apparent as ours, and that they're really no different, right? So I think there can be value in just taking away the pedestal.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough, in 2014, I spent a week on Necker Island with Sir Richard Branson, and it's his home. And the day before I got there, so as I was traveling there, Virgin Galactic lost one of their spaceships over the Mojave Air and Spaceports, over the Mojave Desert over California. The pilot sort of ejected his seat and pulled his parachute and returned to Earth with serious injuries, and the co-pilot, Michael Allsbury, lost his life, which was incredibly sad. And so as I was flying into Necker, Branson was flying out of Necker to go to California to spend time with the family and spend time with the staff. 400 staff at Virgin Galactic had watched this thing happen and then learned that they'd lost a friend in the crash. And then the next day Branson came back. And so I spent a week in the home of one of the greatest business icons the world has ever seen during the largest crisis of his career. And what was fascinating was his humanity and just he'd sit around in board shorts thinking and pondering and talking, and we'd have dinner, he'd have a glass of red, and, you know, just like you or I, you know. You know, this is someone that's been knighted for entrepreneurship, and he's worth, you know, no one knows, call it $8 billion, but enough. And so, yes, I think the glorification of leaders takes away their humanity, which is actually, to me, more impressive than their achievements. Right. And so I think from a cultural perspective, how do you sort of shift that? It's purely around this: not having a preconceived idea of what success is. The minute you go, everybody has a different definition of success, because you could put 99.99999% of people in Richard Branson shoes tomorrow and they would fucking hate it. They would hate it because the pressure, the demands, the time expectations. We see the islands and we see the boats and we see the flying around on jets or whatever. We go, oh, you know, you'd love to be a billionaire. It's like, no, you don't, right? Like someone wrote a book, you know, do you really want to be a billionaire? It's like on average, and again, I don't prescribe to this as necessarily need to be true for everybody, but generally speaking, billionaire, couple of heart attacks, 4 divorces, new lawsuit every week. You know, there's always another side to the reality. And so what I think we can better understand as individuals, as part of a larger culture, is that success is whatever fulfillment is for you, for the individual. And that should be as unique to the individual as their fingerprint.
Yeah. Perfect. I love it. And talking on leadership, so we've seen through history, the history of leadership, for example, you know, in 1840s it was great man theory and trait theory, and 1960s it was situational and contingency leadership, and 78 it was transformational, transactional theory of leadership. And then now we're in 2003, we look at, in 2003 we look at authentic leadership and adaptive leadership. But now in today's world we're sitting in what I've seen coined as neuro leadership, tying this in with neuroplasticity and how that relates in with leadership. Do you think that civilization and its theories evolve as we evolve, or someone comes up with something that resonates with the civilization at a certain frequency that we're all at, being that theory of the teacher will appear when the student is ready? Where do you see the next evolution, for instance, of leadership progressing, and tying this into how we are actually evolving in our states of consciousness?
I think it's exactly that. I think the next form of leadership will be a spiritual one.
Yeah.
You know, there was something recently, I think we were looking at, I can't remember. I think we were looking at, there was some sort of business or entrepreneur awards or something, and they had all of these different sections that relate to the person, but none of the sections spoke about the person's thinking or spirituality. And we were just having a conversation. I was having a conversation with my team about that. I was going, because people don't think of thinking as a thing yet. You know, in terms of culturally, like there's a lot of culture today, thank God, that now do understand, they're conscious of their own thinking.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of culture still don't understand that thinking is something you do. It's not something that happens to you. And, you know, you're kind of driving the bus and responsible for that shit. And so I think the next form of leadership culturally is one is probably, and I'm not coming from a biased perspective here when I say that, it's the conversation you and I are having now.
Yeah.
It's the leader who can speak to the heart as opposed to the intellect. It's the leader who can speak to the soul, right? And I think, and, you know, Oprah talks about this. You know, she says, you know, 20, 30 years ago, she'd be sitting around with one or two of her friends and they'd be talking about spirituality. And they'd remark to themselves, oh, we could never have this conversation out in the real world, because back then they couldn't.
Yeah.
You know, they would have been viewed as if they had 3 heads kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Oprah says, today I have a network that's based around this conversation. So it's amazing to her to see just the evolution in consciousness of humanity, even over the last 20 minutes. And 20 minutes in the grand scheme of things is like .0002 of a second, right? So in terms of an evolutionary sense, it's not much at all. And so to go from can't talk about it in public to have a network, a very successful network that talks about consciousness and choosing a better life and creating and all of that sort of stuff is remarkable evolution. But I still think we haven't reached the tipping point yet. Yeah. It's I wouldn't say it's yet become common culture. I'd say it's becoming a lot more, the conversations like these are becoming a lot more common.
Yeah.
But it's probably 8% of the population sort of thing like this. And so I think the next frontier of leadership belongs to those who understand that the intellect-driven industrial age way of thinking and operating is good and we can't neglect it. However, we do need to now go deeper.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've even noticed it in my 12 years of being in boardrooms and things like that. I've noticed, I was just saying it to someone today that I had a meeting yesterday, and it was with, there were 4 guys around the table. They were all in the building industry, and we were talking about mindfulness meditation. And I'm like, this is awesome.
So good.
So it's happening.
Macquarie Bank have meditation classes.
I love it. Yeah.
Right. Boston Consulting Group now have a red flag report. Like Boston is one of the most respected management consultants in the world.
Yeah.
Red flag report. So if you're billing too many hours, it generates a report to your manager, and then your manager comes and checks in and go, are you okay? Do you think you could work a little bit less? Like in a traditional, prestigious corporate consulting group, 20 years ago, it was the opposite. You'd get a red flag report if you weren't billing enough hours.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's nice to see. I mean, I also presented at a school recently, and they're actually one of the first schools that are going to be bringing in I think in WA, I'm not sure if it's Australia, but a wellness centre, that they're building a specific wellness centre, and they're going to have a technology-free zone and a mindfulness meditation zone, and so that kind of stuff really excites me, because it means the next generation are getting pre-prepared for what will be this new form of leadership, hopefully within our generation. So
that's right.
That's awesome.
And imagine the generation after that generation if we're still here.
We're going to be floating. No one will be talking. It will all be telepathy.
Let's hope so. I look forward to those days.
Yeah, me too. It'll be so much more efficient. We won't need mobile phones. We won't need Skype.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't find that too disbelievable.
Yeah, me either. Now, look, I always put out at the end of my interviews the questions that come from the community, the digital consciousness community. So, is it okay with you if I ask you a few of those, and then we can also let people know where they can find out more about you at the end of this. So, the first question comes from Steph Vandos, and I found it quite an interesting question. He said, "How do you feel in the next 3 to 5 years we're going to have a vast majority of the population potentially having access to the internet for free, powered by the constellation of, saying that it's going to be 648 satellites. So we've got Branson competing with Musk, we've got Google and Facebook all in this game of creating free internet potentially, for 3 billion more people in impoverished nations. So this will be seeing us, in many ways it may demonetize technology, but where do you see, with the impoverished nations coming online, all with different motivations to the first world, how do you think this will add to the global conversation, and how do you feel that it's probably going to impact the way we do business?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I think it's an extrapolation of the outcomes we've already seen. So what's happened in the developed nations where we've had internet? We've become more connected. We've become, in a paradoxical kind of a sense, perhaps more isolated in a personal sense.
Yep.
In a proper connection sense.
Yeah.
Let's sit down with a bottle of red wine type thing. Less of that. A lot of opportunities for commerce, which is great for developing nations. Really important. More opportunities for like bullying and tearing people down. More opportunity for crime, digitally. And so I think if you just look at all of the outcomes that have happened until now in the developed nation, and then extrapolate that out so that it's not 3 or 4 billion people, but it's 7 or 8 billion people, you start to get a pretty good understanding as to how that will look.
Yeah, perfect. And so the next question is from Devon Duke, and he said, what's your take on the aspects of dark and light influencing each other in a paradoxical way?
Your community are cool.
They are awesome. I love them.
What does he mean when he asks that?
I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of guessing that he's talking about the dark and light being the shadow self and the light self and how they influence each other in a paradoxical way. I'd imagine that he's talking about how can the shadow elements implement or influence the light within us, and how does the light within us influence the shadow aspects of self. I don't know. I'm totally interpreting.
Well, there's one argument that says that they give rise to each other. Right. Because we need contrast in order for anything to exist. Yeah. Because in the absence of that which is not, that which is not. Right? And so in the absence of dark there is no light. Because how would we then define it? And so you need to understand that we live in a world of relativity. And so here's the thing. And someone said it, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, or spiritual beings having a human experience. I certainly didn't create that, but some smart person did. And I reckon in a very woo-woo sense, I think it's when you leave this body, I think you go back to light.
Yep. And
you go back to perfection. Right? Like a really interesting study, you study people that have died and come back.
Yeah, I've seen some of that stuff. Interesting.
They all say the same thing.
I've done
and
it.
By the way, have you?
Yeah, when I was like, I don't remember, I was only 2, but I can still tick that box. I totally.
Oh wow! Yeah, there you go. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. But they, and like it's just fascinating. People go into a hospital, they're unconscious. Let's say they've been shot. They go into hospital, they're unconscious. They start getting operated on. They die for a few minutes. They then come back to life. They wake up and they can tell that they know the doctors' names. They can tell the doctors what happened during the minutes that they passed away. And so you kind of go, okay, well, the only explanation for, they sort of describe it as, I was looking down on the operating table in the operating room, and I could recount everything that happened and all of the doctors and what was said during that period. And then the doctors hear that, and you can watch documentaries on it. The doctors hear that and they go, but we can't explain that with traditional science, so we can't acknowledge it to be true. And it's like, what? You see, you're not even going to think about it because it can't be explained with, like, that's how close, like talking about fucking OPRs, right? Social construct. We can't explain it with the models that we've been inventing for the last few hundred years. And so it mustn't have happened, even though the account dictates that it couldn't have not have happened, because there's no way that individual could have had that information. Right. Anyway, so you can study these people, and they all say the same thing. They all say, when I died, everything was so unbelievably simple. It made complete sense. It was perfect, and I've never felt such an overwhelming feeling of unconditional love. Right. And so I think we go back to that place. And so I don't know if, and I might need to do more exploration around this in the coming 5 to 10 years, but I don't know if this human experience is about doing that, right? So I think the shadow and the darkness, while we're here, provides contrast for us to have experiences, both good and bad, that we come here to do.
Exactly. Right? And then the everlasting question of, why do we come here to do this? We come down, lower our vibrational state into this human experience, if you like, going a bit more woo-woo, and we go in and we get into this human experience, and then we're going through this journey of evolution, only to arrive back at the position of what it was we were when we came in.
That's right. Yeah. So what is the point?
What is it?
And on that thing, just on the those that have died, one thing I find fascinating is when Steve Jobs was passing away, right? So he was in hospital, he was in bed, and he had his daughter, his partner, and another woman there. And he knew he was passing, so they sort of said it. He said his goodbyes. Then literally as he was passing, and this is a man who dedicated his life to artistry, simplicity, beauty, technology, evolution. he's literally passing away, and his last ever words as he was passing away, or whatever he was looking at, he said, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow," and then died. Right, and it's amazing to think what caused him to use those words.
Yeah, that totally gave me goosebumps. That's awesome.
Me too.
Yeah, it is amazing. Okay, so I've got 2 more questions for you from our community. One from Mikkel, and Mikkel has asked, if there is one thing you could tell yourself at the start of your entrepreneurial journey, what would it be?
You are walking a very non-traditional path. Therefore, you will face a lot of resistance from everything and everybody, because the path you're walking doesn't fit in with the traditional mold or the social constructs that most of the world has built up. That is a good thing. All you need to do is tap into who you are, what is your heart's desire, and live a life that aligns to that.
Yeah, beautiful. That's perfect. Coin that one. There you go, Mikkel. And then Anne has just asked, how do you plan? So say next 10, 5 to 1 year. Do you do the next quarter, I suppose? How do you make stuff happen? And thank you for being so inspiring.
Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that. So I'm quite... Well, I was going to say I'm quite unique. However, I do think a lot of your audience will probably be able to relate to this a lot. I do my planning in Blue Mountains with a journal, or I'm in Fiji by the pool. And my planning is an exercise in intuition. My planning is an exercise in feeling. And then my planning is an exercise in imagination, right? Particularly as entrepreneurs, I think one of our main jobs is to ask what if, and to imagine and to dream, and then have people around us that are great at turning that into reality, operationalizing it.
Yeah.
And so my planning is often that, I say all my effectiveness comes from my connectedness. And so that's where I draw from. And then I will have a conversation, so I'll know 4 or 5 things I want to achieve in any given year. And then I'll sit down with my COO, I'll sit my execs down, and we will have a strategic planning conversation, quarter by quarter objectives broken down into monthly targets, broken down into weekly objectives, and then project management plans. But my brain kind of stops there, right? When we get to a certain level of granularity, my brain goes, cool, my job's done. Yep. I'll let you guys do the talking and fill in the gaps, right? And so and this is the co-creation thing, is they love and appreciate and really respect the direction and the vision and the guidance that that I can come to the table with.
Yep.
And then I fully respect their ability to, it's that sustain and maintain, and that week in, week out, coming back to the table and delivering and last miling on the project so that they get seen, and so that you end up with, it actually turns into something rather than Jack's dream, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that, and however, it can't be Jack does this and they do that, because then disconnect can form. And so there does need to be an element of overlap in the two. It's just that they know I'm really, really good here, and I know they're really, really good here. And provided we are connected, then that is a beautiful dynamic.
Awesome. Now, that book you just pulled up, do you want to pull that back out again?
Sorry, that wasn't a promotion.
No, but let's do it. I've read this. I've read the book and I love it. And I really want people to know where they can, what it looks like, where they can find it. So tell us a bit about your book. And it's only just come out, hasn't it?
Well, it hasn't even. So it comes out on April the 27th.
Oh, so how did I get it? It's on iTunes.
No, I know, and it shouldn't be, but it is, which is fine. But the book is. It's kind of everything you and I have discussed here. You and I need to have a glass of red wine sometime, clearly. But as I mentioned earlier, I've spent a lot of time studying history, those who have shaped it, those who have influenced humanity. and not from the lens of how do we copy them, because I believe to copy the greats is to not learn from them, but to ask the question, what were the guiding principles that they had? What was their thinking? What was going on in their heart? What was their level of consciousness that enabled them to not only get so much out of themselves, but also to touch the hearts of so many others, to mobilize, in some instances, like a Mandela, millions of people towards one common objective. And I don't think we should all, to our discussion earlier, it's not about becoming the next Nelson Mandela. It's not about becoming the next Oprah Winfrey or Richard Branson. It's about going, because, the only thing that all of those people, some of the names that I mentioned, have in common, the only thing they did the same is that they all did it different.
Yeah.
They all did it different according to who they are. Like, look at a Branson, adventurous, wants to do things he knows little about so he can learn a whole bunch and go on an adventure. Then look at Buffett. Has what he calls a circle of competence, wants to stay in it, doesn't want to, you go, I like the bets where I can step over the hurdle. It's just an easy win. And, my number one rule is don't lose money. And my number two rule is don't forget rule number one. Like, and Buffett, not really interested in media and the flash, whereas Branson loves PR because it can build his businesses and build. Completely opposite, right? And then you look at Oprah again, completely opposite, right? So all they did is tune into who they are, what is the contribution they want to make here on planet Earth, and then lived a life that aligned to that gracefully and unapologetically. So Unwritten is my attempt at bringing together the mosaic of human potential to examine how do we how does one build themselves in the most effective way possible and create themselves according to who they truly are, and then live a life that enables them to achieve success however they define it. And probably a better word than success is to achieve the legacy that they want to achieve, whether that is have a child, whether that is I don't want to do anything, whether that is build a multi-billion-dollar business or large-scale societal change. It's about removing the judgment, coming back to heart, what do you want, and some principles that can enable you to fulfill that.
Beautiful. There it is. Boom. Love it. Good is a really good read. I'm actually glad I was able to divinely get a copy of that before.
Yeah, I know.
It worked out really well, obviously on purpose. But I did enjoy it, and thank you so much. And so if people want to find out more about you, Jack, where do they go? Point them in the direction of where they need to go to find out more about you.
Yeah, so if you want to learn about the book, go to reinvent-tomorrow.com. That's the tagline of the book, Reinvent Tomorrow. So in the website, reinvent-tomorrow.com. jackdelosa.com to learn about me. And then our education institution, so we deliver educational programs that enable people to live a life on purpose, whether that's run your own business or not, doesn't really matter. And that's called The Entourage. So that's just the-entourage.edu.au. So through all of those channels, I'll
chuck all those links into the body of the post as well, just so they can quickly get to it if they need to. So thank you so much for gifting us an hour of your time. We went a bit over, but of course I reckon we could talk for days.
We could.
but I do really appreciate you making the time in what is, I'm sure, a very busy schedule. So thank you so much, Jack, for spending time with us on Digital Consciousness TV. One more quick question that I ask every single person on this interview is, what do you think it means to be digitally conscious?
Sorry, the grunt is because it's such a good question. What does it mean to be digitally consciously and wholly yourself in the digital age?
Love it. Beautiful, succinct, perfect.
Thank you. And I'm a big fan of you, Tennille, and I'm now a big fan of your community, given the caliber of questions that came through. So thank you very much for the conversation and the contribution to all of your guys that sent through questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much.